Nice.
See them all coming in. Hello, everyone. We just let people shove through the virtual doors of our virtual town hall and get cracking for today's Australia at Home discussion. We've got a great group coming in, and thank you all for coming back and joining us again. Particular shout out for all our friends in Melbourne who I know are still, living on the front line of, the public health response to this pandemic. It's public health that's really going to be the discussion today through the frame of climate and Paddy Manning's fantastic new book, Body Count. Before we get into the discussion though, I just want to acknowledge that wherever we are around Australia, we are all of us on Indigenous land. I'm on the land of the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation, and like all of you, I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise the land we're on was never ceded. I can see so many familiar faces, and it's great to have you all coming back in again. For anyone that's new to this though, the way we like to run these events is very relaxed and inclusive. We encourage people to turn their cameras on, to put on gallery view so you get a sense of the clicking over 150 people that are in the room at the moment, and to use the chat, firstly, to introduce yourself. Secondly, if you've got any tech problems, to shout out to Ariane, who's running tech support today. But most importantly, to ask questions. So we'll be pulling out questions from the room and putting them to Paddy and our other guest, Fiona Armstrong, as the discussion emerges. So today, body count. Paddy Manning writes books the way most people make Sunday dinners. And his latest book, Body Count, is a series of personal accounts of the human cost of climate change. Now, Paddy would normally be swanning around the country doing book clubs now, but one of the tragic things for an author in this time is that those events just aren't possible. So we're the next best thing, guys. And, as someone that has done a book tour, that you don't get a lot of people in the room, but it's a great opportunity to talk about your ideas and to get a first-hand feedback on people of how things have gone, but also importantly to sell books. So the other thing we'll be doing through this discussion every now and then is putting in a link to Paddy's book. If you click and buy it today, we'll work out some way of getting a signature to you at some stage in the future. So I just want to, before we get going, introduce Paddy, introduce Fiona Armstrong, who's the Executive Director of the Climate and Health Alliance, and say hi to both of you. And the way that we often start out our Australia at Homes is just to see how both of you have been going through this crazy time. So firstly, Paddy, welcome. Thanks for sharing your book with all of us. And how are you going?
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. Yeah, going pretty well. Getting a bit bored of writing about COVID, I've got to say. Not to mention being stuck at home. So, yeah, that's my whinge. But I suppose, yeah, there could be worse things. And I've got a job. And I suppose really it is a kind of... it's a once in a lifetime event that we're going through, and even if it is even if the daily kind of long-winded press conferences and so forth that I end up covering can drag on, it is still kind of unprecedented times. So I shouldn't complain. It's a good time to be a journalist.
And I'm a hopeless MP. I'm not even an MP and never will be. I should have pointed out also that Paddy is the monthly's political contributing editor, and he does the daily missive / blog / email blast, which is fantastic reading. If you're not signed up to that, you probably should be. And Paddy, in terms of covering an event like this on a daily basis, what's changed about the way that you report on the world when it's such a single big event that you're trying to make sense of day by day?
Yeah, I've never seen any story dominate the news in my, going back to whatever it was, September 11, the financial crisis. Nothing has taken over the media the same way as this pandemic in my lifetime. So every day, every angle is kind of pandemic related, and that's how it feels anyway. So that's why it can sometimes feel like a grind or a Groundhog Day. although I have to admit I've never seen the movie Groundhog Day, so so don't ask me any questions about that. But yeah, I do find myself flipping between, oh my God, this is incredible. All the assumptions that were applicable up until March, about where we were sitting politically and economically, and how, post-election and climate related, everything are all out the window. And anything is possible again, and feeling like, wow, this is an amazing time. And then sometimes feeling like, oh, I just want it to be over, and I want the lockdowns to be over, and I want the daily case count and the daily death toll to be over. And I suppose like that, I suppose just about every Australian is in that boat.
And hi, Fiona. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. How's your life changed through this period, and how are you going?
Thanks, Peter. Well, in stage 4 lockdown in Melbourne, so it's getting a little bit tiresome. They're being out for an hour a day. Thank God we've had a bit of sunshine. It's extraordinary how, incredibly grateful Melburnians and Victorians suddenly feel when the sun's out. But we're not doing what we anticipated doing after the Black Summer, which was launching into, really accelerated action on climate change, when those bushfires, unprecedented bushfires, with a force equivalent to an atomic bomb, kind of exploded along the East Coast. And finally, people began to get what we've been talking about in terms of the health impacts of climate change. People were deeply affected, even if they weren't in those areas, or witnessing or being exposed to the air pollution that blanketed the East Coast. And people were incandescent with rage, really, about the inaction that had got us to that point. And we were feeling pretty hopeful after that summer that this was a moment in which to push forward on climate change and health. And so, then the world gave us the pandemic, which is another health impact, which is, contributed to by climate change. So it was a different kind of outcome, but it's been a bit of a constraint on our pushing forward for climate action.
And that link between climate and the pandemic is something that I'm fascinated in digging into with you guys over the course of this hour. But I wanted to start off, Paddy, just with the motivations for writing this book. In a way, it's a very personal book and a very political book at the same time. Where did you get the idea, and how did the whole thing come together?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, and I should acknowledge, at least I'm in Sydney and I'm not in Melbourne, so I can't complain about the lockdowns, really. So for anyone who's in Melbourne, my deepest sympathy. And my whole, the whole team at the Monthly is there. So this book, I had this idea about 3 years ago, and in fact, Fiona was one of the very first people, and there was 2 people, and also a climate scientist, who I emailed an outline to say, what do you think of this idea? The idea is that we've had like 10, 15, 20, maybe more years of debate about climate, but I think the public has tuned out because it's kind of climate waffle. It's kind of like, oh, what percent of, emissions reductions are we targeting this week, and what parts per, million of CO2 are in the atmosphere, and what's the impact on electricity bills? And somehow the debate has lost its impact. And I thought that a way to cut through was to try and tell the stories of the people who've lost the most to climate change. And so what happens, it seems to me, every time, having written about climate on and off as a journalist for more than a decade, it seems to me that what happens every time there's a natural disaster, it's somehow seen as politicizing or opportunistic to start talking about climate change at that time while people are going in the middle of a tragedy. And the science isn't clear at that time. The science takes, sometimes years to come in as to, whether you can definitively attribute a particular extreme weather event to warming and to what degree, and it contributed to the severity or the frequency of that event. And so the debate is actually never held. We never actually join the dots between this series of increasingly severe and increasingly frequent natural disasters and the human toll that it's taking.
And it's
so
weird because if it's road deaths, as soon as there's a car crash, there'll be a road safety warning. But when in the past people have made comments about bushfire and climate, they're seen as exploiting misery and as if they're not playing by the rules. It's really interesting, different standards, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's ridiculous. And actually, I think it started to change in this Black Summer, but I didn't know that when I embarked on the book, of course. I started it in 2017. I didn't get going until early last year. And then, of course, found that I was writing the book in the middle of this unprecedented bushfire season, after years of drought with, heat wave, and then also these bushfires taking over, like 10+ million hectares, and a real body count occurring as I was writing. So, and just I think in that summer we started to see the public, from the ground up, not the political class, but the public, the victims of these disasters, actually speaking up and going, well, if not now, when? If we're not going to talk about climate change right now when it's killing us, when are we? And you remember there was a press conference which I describe in the book, where Greg Mullins, who was the head of a group of, he was a former fire chief in New South Wales and also head of a group of emergency leaders, 23 of them, who called for climate action and directly did connect the disastrous bushfire season with global warming. And he said exactly that point. Whenever there's, the Grenfell Tower goes up, everyone wants to talk about the cause. If there's a train crash, everybody wants to talk about the cause. But when there's a natural disaster linked to global warming, nobody wants to make the connection between, the connection with warming. And I think the public's kind of patience sort of ran out over that summer. And it turned, so I felt as though, just as Fiona was suggesting a second ago, as though, well, maybe this book will be timely in helping to kind of facilitate a conversation about the loss of life that is actually, linked to this, hotter world that we're sort of galloping into. And so I just started going around to all the towns around Australia where, and a lot of them are regional towns, where these disasters had struck, and bowling up and going to the pub and saying, look, do you know the family of X, Y, and Z? If I knew I knew the names, obviously, of the people who died, and trying to get to them and talk to them about their thoughts about climate change.
So tell me about some of the stories that you have brought to life in this book. Some of the people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I sort of get asked which was the most powerful story, and I can never answer it every single time I get stumped. I spoke to the husband of a woman, Alison Tenner. His name is David. She died in the Canberra bushfires in 2003, and I think that arguably she's one of the first kind of casualties of climate change in Australia, because scientists say that was a fire that at the time shocked the scientific community. It was started by dry lightning. Dry lightning had never, there was a whole, there was hundreds and hundreds of lightning strikes that started those fires in 2003 that spread across New South Wales, ACT and Victoria, but they'd never seen, most often there's a human source for fires actually, but they'd never seen dry lightning start fires of such magnitude before, and these were the first where that happened and took human life. And I spoke to David. He was a former Air Force engineer, maintenance engineer. He was stationed up in Richmond on the day that the fires went into the western suburbs of Canberra, and I talked, he's no climate activist by any means. He retired with post-traumatic stress, but and was part of a small class action against the ACT government. But he's no activist. but in talking to him about global warming, you know, he told me that, yeah, he does believe that, well, if it can be shown that, you know, those fires were started by dry lightning, well, then I think you can argue that it's linked to climate change. And of course, that is the case. So it's a kind of interesting conversation where he hadn't had that debate before. And he's not a climate denier either. He's not a skeptic. He's not a activist. He's just thinking through a question, not for the first time, but, you know, I really did get the sense that he hadn't actually thought about it as a climate-fueled disaster before. And so, so that was interesting to me.
You got fire and you got flood, which kind of makes sense to me, but then you go into an area like heat. Explain the arguments around heat, older people dying of heat exhaustion, and the story in your book of the chap in the motorised chair.
Yeah, well, I mean, as it would be obvious to everyone listening, I'm no expert. I'm just a journalist, so I've not tried to prove that anyone was killed by climate change, because so all I've done is I've sought relevance, not proof, and yet I've tried to consult with experts along the way, both on the climate side and the health side, including Fiona, about, okay, have I got this series of events right, and you know, I've struck some off that didn't seem, where the fingerprint of climate change wasn't so strong. But interestingly enough, heat is if you look over the previous century, heat is the biggest killer by a country mile of Australians. You know, it accounts for more deaths than all other natural hazards put together, whether it's fire or flood or earthquakes, you know, cyclone. Heat is bigger than all of them. And heat is also the area where the climate fingerprint is strongest. You know, it's almost unarguable, according to the scientists that I interviewed. And yet it was very hard to find people who had actually succumbed to heat wave, because it's very underreported medically. It's often reported as a stroke or a heart attack, and or I should say reported. I mean recorded. And there's this concept of a statistical death where it's an excess death. It's an increase in the rate of death above what would normally occur. And and Fiona can, I'm sure, talk at more length about this, but there's a well-known kind of harvesting effect, so that it's the frail, it's the young, it's the elderly, it's the vulnerable who are the first to die, you know, in a heat wave. So I found it very hard to find someone, but there was a doctor, Kim Liu, who is from an organisation called Doctors for the Environment Australia, talking at a Stop Adani rally back in Parramatta in Western Sydney in the lead up to last year's election. And she was saying that one of her patients, she'd been a GP for 15 years out in Western Sydney, and one of her patients had gone up to Bunnings on his mobility scooter on a 40-degree plus day, and then subsequently died. And she wrote down alongside the heart attack, he was old, he was over 80, and he had a lot of kind of comorbidities. He was diabetic, and he'd had a bypass before. But she also wrote heat on the death certificate for the very first time, and I thought, that's an incredible story. And then so I followed that up and I spoke to the guy's name was Chuck McLeod, and I spoke to his daughter. And again, she's not a climate activist. She's just said, I'm happy to talk to you about how my dad died. I'm aware that Kim Liu, the GP, is a climate activist, and I support it, but I'm not, I just want to get the word out, look after your old folks in the heat. And so, I thought it was quite a touching story in a way, that this guy is old and cantankerous and decides after a beer and a half that he was going to go up, just a couple of days after Christmas, he was going to go up to Bunnings and bugger what his doctor said and bugger what his daughter said. He was going to go up on the 20-minute round trip, and but then sadly, then sadly it was too much for him.
I might bring Fiona in at this point. So we obsess over death counts. We obsess over it when it comes to the road toll. You know, the indicators at the moment in terms of the pandemic are around, you know, death count. Do we actually have a matrix for measuring climate death at the moment, Fiona? And if not, you know, how do we build a picture?
Not really, unfortunately, and for the reason that Paddy pointed out, that these deaths are recorded, you know, related to the presentation of people's systems and the organs that are affected, that are, you know, appear when they present to emergency or so on. That tends to dictate how their deaths are recorded. I mean, to take it further from Kim Lu's assignation of heat as a cause of death in that instance. I mean, Dr. Anna Greta Hunter, and I think you mentioned this in the book, Paddy, has argued that climate change should appear on some people's death certificates. But the reality is we don't collect that data. The dots are not being joined. There's no obligation to collect data. Certainly people are arguing that we need to do a much better job, and heat is definitely, you know, a place where we can start. I've just been alerted to a comment in the chat, John Englert pointing to an article that was published by Anna Greta and Simon Quilty and others a few months ago, saying that the statistics around heat deaths in Australia are likely to be underestimated 50-fold, I think was the figure. You know, an extraordinarily large number. And people are dying across the world. You know, people will be dying right now in the heat wave that's happening in Europe. There was a very dramatic heat wave in Europe. And again, I think, Paddy, you referred to this in the book. Tony McMichael did a lot of work in relation to trying to do the estimates of the deaths from a dramatic heat wave in Europe in 2003. 70,000 excess deaths in that one summer. So, you know, if that wasn't a wake-up call then, I remember, you know, reading about it at the time and thinking, good grief, this will absolutely deliver change. And it did deliver some change in terms of adaptation and responsiveness and kind of systems to alert people to checking on those who were vulnerable. But it didn't translate into climate action because those connections weren't made.
I might just go to the room. There's a few questions coming through. Is Blair happy to come on and ask his question? If you're there, Blair,
Sure.
you're on mic. Hello.
If it's okay that I am a woman.
Indeed, I apologise.
Oh, that's okay, not to worry. Yeah, my question, Paddy, was around the LA, California heat wave fire stuff, and Fiona. If you think that, how are you? If you think that happening kind of, you know, it happens here over a period of 3-4 months and then almost a month apart, maybe it starts up in the Northern Hemisphere, whether that is starting to be the penny that's dropping for people. So this week, they've already had a big heat wave in California, fires and grid going out. You know, the other knock-on that makes this challenging, and I'm sure Fiona would talk about, is, you know, knock out the grid because of heat and fire, and you've got this series of events that happen where people don't have air conditioning or necessarily some of the other things, refrigeration, that can cool them down and keep them alive. So whether you think this kind of cyclical back and forth between here, California, and other parts of the world, is that starting to drop with people in terms of awareness?
Well, I definitely think it's starting. I mean, that's one of the issues that Greg Mullins was trying to raise with the federal government and the other emergency chiefs last year, which was that the fire season is getting longer. It's actually overlapping now with the fire season in North America, and meaning that it's harder for us to get, you know, things like air tankers when we need them. And so, yes, I think that, you know, there's a book that's just been reissued, Stephen Pine's kind of history. I think it's called The History of Fire. And he talks about how California and Victoria are two of the most fire-prone, you know, regions in the world. And I think that is definitely impinging on the Australian consciousness now that we've got, not only that, we've also got the wildfires in Siberia. And, you know, it's kind of, I think the penny is starting to drop. But one of the kind of broader arguments that I'm making in this book is that it's not so much climate change killing us, it's ignorance killing us. That where is the great public awareness campaign by the federal government, equivalent to the campaign, for example, that they ran in the AIDS pandemic, or against plain packaging for tobacco, to alert the public to the dangers, the health dangers here and now, not to the environment or future generations, but to your health here and now. Where's the federal government warning about that? I just noticed, Peter, that one of the chats is actually one of the women I interviewed in this book, Imogen Jubb, who
Imogen, welcome.
Yeah, who just said she was happy to talk about her experience, and I'll just throw to you, Imogen, wherever you are. I can't see.
Yeah, away you go, Paddy and Imogen in conversation. Hi, Imogen.
So yeah, my mum died early or late in January this year, which was it's one of those situations where it's a bit hard to tell, but she had a heart condition pre-existing, but the smoke and the heat and the stress of the fires over summer, I think, all played a role in her passing. And my dad actually said that he thought climate change played a role in her dying, which was a bit of a surprise to me. He's not really, he's quite aware of climate change because I've worked in it for a long time, but it was a bit of a surprise to hear him say that.
Did you say Canberra?
Yeah, in Canberra.
Yeah, so it's had the worst air quality in the world for a number of days there, yeah?
Yeah, it was pretty horrific. I looked at the stats of it all. The air quality was horrific. The temperatures were, 5 to 6 degrees above average for the summer, your normal Canberra summer temperatures, which are quite hot already. I feel like it played a role in it. And, lots of people talk about climate change affecting their grandchildren, or, they're really worried about the quality of their grandchildren's lives. And, I've worked in climate for a long time. And to be honest, it never occurred to me that it would affect my parents' health. I think changing that conversation is maybe part of it. Maybe you need to stop thinking about your kids and start thinking about yourselves, because it's all happening faster and quicker than most people imagined. And, I think also, lots of the projections around climate are pretty clear, but I don't think anyone foresaw these sorts of scenarios with air quality and heat like we experienced over summer. So even though we have really good scientific data around this stuff, there's still situations that are just going to get thrown up really out of the curveball that we've been thinking about, and we need to be able to address them quickly and fast. And health policy that can manage this stuff is one of the key outcomes around keeping people safe.
Hey, Fiona, yeah, you go.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, because it's a while since I actually did speak with you, do you have a cause of death yet? Because I think at the time we spoke, you did not yet have an official cause of death for your mum.
I haven't seen the death certificate. I expect it says something around heart failure, but I haven't been able to get to Canberra, so I haven't been able to look at it.
I was just going to ask Fiona, as a public health expert, that notion of consequence and building out the consequence of global warming, climate change, however you want to approach it, that's kind of the challenge in terms of shifting the conversation, isn't it?
I guess it is, yes, because climate change can seem very distant and far away in terms of time, although, as Imogen says, it's right here and right now, but it's hard to look out your window and kind of see those events that are clearly linked to climate change. But that's where the health frame is really important, because when you do start to talk to people about the health impacts of climate change, and those are very varied, from extreme weather events to infectious diseases to impacting food and water security, impacting people's ability to work, there's air pollution and aeroallergens and so on. When you do take people on a journey and connect the dots for them. And research from Sustainability Victoria shows that people don't readily make the connections between climate change and health, but when you do connect the dots for them, it seems obvious and they wonder why they didn't understand it before. It makes sense to them. And then they start to think about who knows about that and who should have been telling them. So that goes to, the public education campaign that Paddy is talking about, because you know, people start to think, gosh, this is a threat to my health right now and that of my family. The evidence around it is very strong. The World Health Organization are, you know, issuing very sort of strenuous threats around this, talking about it as a health emergency. Why didn't I know? And why hasn't the government told me? Why haven't they, you know, been putting my interests at the forefront and making sure that I'm aware so that I can take health protective measures? And why aren't they taking action on climate change? So it's a really great way to make that bridge and to take people on a journey to make climate change personal, relevant, and in the immediate term, and also transition people to an expectation about action in terms of mitigation and adaptation to protect them.
So do you see where we are now as a result of neglect or willful disinformation? Because, you know, it strikes me the similarities with tobacco 40 years ago.
Yeah, look, it's a combination, isn't it? I mean, governments are ignoring evidence that they don't want to know about, that's uncomfortable for them to know about because it, you know, contrasts with the interests of those who are, you know, filling their coffers when it comes to re-election. It's complicated. The solutions aren't simple, and you know, it's, yeah. So I think there's a combination of ignoring the evidence and willful negligence, really, because I think, you know, the evidence is well understood over many decades. Tony McMichael writing about this over 3 decades. The World Health Organization and Lancet Medical Journal issuing ever more strident calls for action over decades as well, but almost zero from our federal government in terms of action or a response that recognises the health impacts of climate change. Despite that now being embedded in the Paris Agreement, in the preamble, there's an obligation for nations to consider citizens' right to health in the context of climate change, which means that they have to consider what the impacts of climate change are on the population when they think about climate policy and what the opportunities are to protect health through climate action. But that is not happening at all. We're seeing some emerging action from the states and territories, but it's slow, but it's beginning.
Before we get into the second part of the discussion, we had a question from Tara, who's actually with the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation. Are you there, Tara?
I am.
So
Hi.
you deal with a few public health issues on a daily basis?
Especially in Victoria at the moment, yes.
So you had a question a little bit earlier, just comparing it with
Well,
other health
more-
crises.
Yeah, more like a comment. So in 2014, when a rugby player was killed with what at the time was called a king hit and is now called one punch, there was a huge outcry. Legislation changed. It's now a major offence. And you look at the impact that we have with climate change, we can, and we've seen this with COVID as well, we can make substantive change when it's important enough to the people who have the power to make decisions. And yet here we are, as Paddy was saying, more than 20 years on to this discussion with very little changing. So it's not that we don't have the capacity, it's that there aren't enough people who have the power to make the change with the will to change.
Yeah, and you'd see this every day in your general reporting, Paddy.
Yeah, I have to say, I found, you know, there are a lot of things. It's not like we're a rabbit in the headlights and, you know, we're going to be run over by climate change and there's nothing we can do. You know, like I expected that there was a risk this book would be grim and depressing, and including for myself writing it. But I found myself kind of inspired and galvanized. Not so much about, oh yeah, I'm gonna, you know, get back into the climate wars, but because what came through in doing the interviews, and I decided to kind of try and get as close as to tell, you know, fewer stories better rather than try and, you know, skate over hundreds of different stories. And so I wanted to make sure that the people that I spoke to were comfortable with what they've said, and it wasn't, you know, a quick hit in any way, even if I wrote the book in a year, which was fairly fast, but it was, but what I found was that I was inspired by the kind of love and solidarity that, you know, came across from the people that I was interviewing. So so it kind of gave me hope that Australians will, when the chips are down, will look after each other, and they are, you know, aware of, you know, the seriousness of the climate situation increasingly, and they will at the right time, you know, act. That might sound a bit woolly, but you know, in story after story, people who I was bowling up to and out of the blue saying, do you think that the, you know, death of your father, mother, child was related to climate change? And they were kind of stepping back, because often, even if it was an event that was 15 years ago, or even like Black Saturday, huge debate about whether it's related to climate change, but still that's not resolved in the, you know, you bowl up to Kinglake and people go, oh, no, it had nothing to do with it. You get the same divisions that you get in the rest of the community. But what you definitely get talking to people is the sense that Australians will rally, ordinary Australians will rally together, look after each other in you know, in a crisis, and that gives us, that gave me a lot of hope, and was inspiring that actually when the time comes, we will sort this, and sort it with that kind of common sense that I think Australians, you know, is one of our national kind of characteristics.
So can we move on to the current context, which is obviously this global pandemic? I've read in some places, and you deal with it at the end of your book, and I'm sure you rushed to actually sort of deal with this as you were trying to get it to the publishers, Paddy, but the notion that the pandemic is not totally separated from the drivers of climate change, particularly deforestation, population movements. Where does that land? I'm interested in both you and Fiona's view on where are the connections with the pandemic and the broader issues around climate.
Well, I'll just be very quick, because I'll just boil it down to the simplest possible terms, because I'm a hack. But basically, the way I understood it, including from interviewing Fiona and reading her work and the work of, you know, anyway, some great Australian scientists, including Tony McMichael, who Fiona's mentioned. The way I boiled it down in my head was that the things that are driving warming are the things that are driving the new age of pandemics. So I spoke to a couple of scientists about why are we seeing this rise of zoonoses? Why is that? And over the last 30 years, you know, Ebola, AIDS, you know, SARS, MERS, bird flu. We have just had we've had a lot of warning about this age of pandemics, and they have been increasing, and you know, what I took from it was that the things that are forcing animals and humans together are also causes of climate change. So, you know, the overpopulation and overconsumption and the deforestation that's forcing animals to come into the human environment, that is where a lot of these diseases, that's how a lot of them are starting. And so, yeah, I interviewed scientists about it, and I also interviewed the widow of Tony McMichael, who was a legend, just for anyone who doesn't know, you know, I learned in the process of researching this book, was you know, I think an under-recognised Australian scientist, even though he had an Order of Australia and an emeritus professor at ANU and a very distinguished career. But yeah, he wrote a book called Planetary Overload in 1993, and he wrote the first health section of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment report, second assessment report in 1995. He was a pioneer. His work has been compared with Rachel Carson. He was a pioneer of the connections between climate and health. And I interviewed his wife, who finished off, Judith Healy, who finished off his last book and is involved in a thing called the Commission for Human Futures. She's a fellow academic at ANU, and she kind of told me about these connections and about the warnings that Tony McMichael was making about about the connections, but also that the bitter irony that he himself succumbed in 2014 at the age of 72 to an unknown influenza strain. So he was up in Darwin. He had his flu shot. He was still going like a train by all who knew him. Very, lots of work to do, and involved in his third book. But there was naval exercises on, and a lot of sailors coming through Darwin at that point, and somehow he's picked up an unknown influenza strain that's ultimately taken his life. And it's a kind of the flu it's getting worse and coming around more often, as Judith told me. And she believed that Tony himself was part of the kind of body count in a way. And so yeah, I found the connections between the kind of warming and the increasing incidence of pandemics to be kind of fascinating and also kind of terrifying, but also pointing to the solutions to the two things can be quite the same, quite similar. And you kind of feel that yourself in the middle of these lockdowns, that the lockdown is quite green. And so kind of teasing that out, I found was fascinating.
And Fiona, I understand you actually studied under Tony in earlier times, or your work's been informed by his work?
Well, certainly Tony was a mentor and a hero. So yes, influenced by his work. And I mean, I think if only Tony was alive now, because an epidemiologist, as someone who deeply understood both infectious diseases and planetary health and climate change and health, he would be a stellar guide for us right now. Fortunately, we've got great people like Peter Doherty and so on who are picking that up. But yeah, it's certainly the case. I mean, it's been interesting because we talk about and have talked about for years the rise of infectious diseases increasing, the rise of the risk from infectious diseases increasing related to climate change. And yet, when the pandemic arrived, it was quite unexpected in terms of, just how virulent it was and what a dramatic impact it's had. It's certainly the case, though, that infectious disease experts have been preparing for this for decades and saying, this is exactly what we can expect to happen because of our treatment of the natural environment, our destruction of the natural world, and the fact that we are encroaching on, virgin ecosystems. Well, there's no such thing anymore because our, deforestation and expansion of urban environments and so on, whether it's for mining or, new cities or roadways, brings us in closer contact with the natural world and with other species, and our activities causing ill health in other species. Therefore, they are more likely to carry disease and we're closer to them, so it's more likely to jump over to us. So I wrote a piece early in the pandemic with my colleagues Tony Capon, who's the Professor of Planetary Health at Monash, Director of Monash Sustainable Development Unit, and Ro McFarlane, who's been researching, and I think, Paddy, you've interviewed Ro in the book, researching zoonotic disease and links between animal and human health for a very long time. And our message was that coronavirus is a wake-up call, that our war with the environment is leading to pandemics. I mean, we've had other zoonoses in Australia in the past. I mean, internationally, we've seen sort of Zika virus. Here in Australia, we've had Hendra, but COVID-19 is probably the disease X that, World Health Organization has been preparing for. And the reason that we're seeing it is because, we're in the middle of a mass extinction event, and our impact on the natural world, both from our behavior and also our contribution to climate change, is making both of those things worse. It's making us more vulnerable. Air pollution from the same causes that contribute to climate change is making us more vulnerable to COVID. So in places in the world where people are exposed to very poor air quality, there's poorer outcomes in relation to COVID. But Tony McMichael would say climate change is a threat multiplier. It just makes every threat to health worse, and so it does to us as it does to the natural world, and that combination means that we end up with these kinds of events. So we are going to see more of them. The good news is that the solutions are the same: to halt our destruction of the natural world, to invest in securing biodiversity and ecosystems, because they are the foundation for human health and well-being. And to do that, we need to cut emissions, because global warming is creating enormous pressures and leading to ecosystem collapse.
This is where I think it gets difficult with the public health frame around this. So normally public health messaging around, say, smoking or diet is very much, you just throw a bucket of money at it and you get people to change their behaviour, and you might regulate the offering to the public. This is much more complex, isn't it? So this is a systemic challenge that creates public health implications, but it's not something that's going to be fixed by a bit of public awareness.
Not fixed by a bit of public awareness, but the solutions are available to us and they're good for health. So moving to cleaner energy systems, both for energy and transport, is going to clean up the air and address that massive air pollution burden that we have each year, worth billions of dollars in health damages from deaths and lost productivity. Investing in restoring our ecosystems and securing our food systems, obviously very good for health, because the longer we delay in doing that, the more we lose in terms of agricultural productivity and the opportunity to secure health systems and affordable food for everybody. Active and public forms of transport are low carbon forms of transport, and they happen to be good for health and well-being at the same time. So that's another really important message associated with the links between climate change and health, is that climate solutions are health solutions. And Maria Neira and her colleagues at World Health Organization are very fond of saying the Paris Agreement is a public health agreement. And what they're saying in relation to that is that action on climate change is the best thing that we can do to secure global public health.
Paddy, in your final chapter, you write a little about the idea of a planetary health model. That kind of is the bringing together a different way of thinking about the way all these systems interact.
Yeah, well, I ended up, as Fiona mentioned before, talking to Tony Capon, who I'm actually, I'm going to do a launch with him next week, actually. But yeah, he talks about the Sustainable Development Goals, that basically you have to, there is a framework for action, that can address all of these problems at the same time. And it's been agreed by the UN. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so, it's a bigger picture than just climate or just pandemics. It's a sort of broader agenda, and I had never thought about it. I mean, reveal my own ignorance. I had never thought about Australian, human health as being linked to animal health. I'd never thought about natural environments as being disease regulators. For me, these were all eye-opening concepts. But as soon as, it's like what Fiona was saying before, once the health consequences of climate change are kind of put in front of you, you go, of course, that's obvious. And it is the case that we can't, you can't expect that. Well, actually, it was, I think it was Zika virus. It was Ray McFarlane talking me through Zika virus, how the bats, the trees that were chopped down, I think it was Malaysia, don't quote me, but, I think it was the trees, the chopping down of trees forced bats to get mangoes out of pig pens, and out of that process, the pigs picked up this virus off the bats, and the pigs then slaughtered and eaten by humans caused the virus to take off, spill over, if you like, from animals to humans. So it's kind of these, and I think Ebola started, I'm not sure about the index case there, but I think it started with, deforestation as well. The Hendra virus, you know, Rode talked about that, about how there was a dispersal of bats that was linked to the Queensland floods in 2011, and suddenly this Hendra virus that had you know, been sort of under control, suddenly there was a rash of cases. So there's all of these myriad little connections that are that you know, we can kind of go through our lives in blissful ignorance of our connections, of how our health depends on the health of the animals and nature around us. But you know, the pandemic is sort of waking us, has sort of been, like Fiona says, given us a great big wake up call. I mean, one of the people I interviewed was a guy, Peter Jackson, up in the Townsville flood. So here's a you know, I was going to say tenuous. It's not tenuous, but it's thin. You know, the connection is that his wife died. Now, she had had chemo. She was vulnerable. She was young. She was fit, but she had had chemo, so her immunity was low. They were living in a caravan outside Townsville when the floods came through in 2019. That caused an outbreak of melioidosis. Now, the melioidosis is not new. It's been around forever. Well, I don't know about forever, but it's been around for decades up in the top end. It's a tropical soil disease. It comes out of the ground when it's wet. And if you've got a cut or something like that, healthy people would laugh it off. But someone like Leonie is vulnerable. And she keeled over in their caravan one day, and he never got to speak to her again, say goodbye, anything. She was in intensive care within hours. She was a nurse, and then she was dead. And so I interviewed the director of public health at Townsville, a guy called Stephen Donoghue, and said, well, look, you know, does the tropical soil disease have anything to do with climate change? Well, if you've got increasingly severe cyclones and storms, now that's a separate question. That's a climate science question. You know, and I interviewed climate scientists about that, and they say, well, actually the connection is, you know, they might be that the storms are less frequent, but more intense. So rainfall, we might get a decrease in rainfall overall, but we get more intense rainfall when it happens. And so you're drawing, anyway, Stephen Donoghue says to me, yes, I think, you know, I think you can draw the connection between warming and the increasing incidence of vulnerability to this tropical soil disease. And broadly, if the tropics are expanding, we're going to have more tropical disease. You know, it's that simple. It's sort of, at one level, it's really complicated. At another level, it's really simple. And yeah, I felt that talking to Peter about it was perfectly valid and put it in the story. And he felt so too. Although, again, he's not a scientist. He's a bloke who's lost his wife. And suffered a tragedy, but happy to talk about it, and not clear in his mind. Well, what's the relationship between the Townsville floods and the death of his wife? Well, you know, he in the end tells me, well, I think the fact that he was prepared to talk about it is a kind of like, yes, I think this is an important conversation, and that's all I was after, is to have a conversation, not beat it up or down, not try and iron out the wrinkles, just tell it as it is. That's what I hope I've done with the book.
Yeah, and congratulations for it, Paddy. Having flicked through it last night, I really encourage people to click on the link in the chat and get a copy of it. As we've got 5 minutes left, I thought we'd round out this discussion just reflecting on the way, you know, largely our public institutions seem to have held up through the pandemic crisis. I know there's huge issues in nursing homes at the moment, but we've seen the way that, you know, different levels of government have swung in and, you know, worked in ways that are far more collaborative than normal. Fiona and then Paddy, I guess the final thought is, so what needs to change in the broader body politic, do you think, to do justice to the notion of climate as a public health risk?
Well, I might go quickly. You finish off, Pally. I guess I would say in relation to pressure on our health systems, comparing climate change and COVID, that we ain't seen nothing yet in terms of what we're going to see from accelerating global warming if we fail to take action, that our health systems will not be able to cope, that we know already that our health systems are not well prepared for climate change. We've done work for the Queensland government developing a climate and health plan for them and interviewing health services from Brisbane up to Townsville and Cairns and out to Toowoomba. Only a very small proportion of them have done any climate risk assessment to understand what climate change risks from extreme weather or pandemics or anything are going to mean for their on their infrastructure, on their workforce, on their supply chains. And, you know, you can see what happens in a global pandemic when you have a decline in international travel, that supply chains can get very tenuous. We've seen it in relation to the supply of PPE. We've seen, you know, very common medications, antibiotics, blood pressure pills, antidepressants, hormone replacement therapy in very short supply because global supply chains are impacted. We're only going to see those more from climate change. So we've been very lucky in Australia so far that our health systems have held up very well, but we should not kid ourselves that they are climate ready or that they are climate resilient or that we will have the infrastructure and the processes in place to you know, ensure that our current good health for the large proportion of the population continues into the future. But, you know, that said, there's a lot that we can do. And as I said, you know, those solutions for climate change are also health solutions. It's not technology that we have to invent at some time in the future. It's available now. It's cheaper than the alternatives. So it's simply a matter of implementing it. And in order to do that, we need to create political will. And we need to create a mandate for politicians to act. And for people to engage on the issue of climate change, it's a way of making climate change relevant, personal to people, for which, you know, climate action will deliver for health very significant benefits in the short term. Improving air quality means you have a decline in respiratory emissions within weeks, you know, so the climate benefits will accumulate in the longer term.
And final word to you, Paddy. You're a storyteller. What do you want people to take away finally from this book?
I suppose that that we're sort of, we're in danger, and that but we're in it together. And you know, for me, the pandemic has kind of woken us up to the obvious that, you know, we should listen to scientists, we should listen to experts. You know, the populist backlash that you see, whether it's Boris Johnson or Donald Trump or Bolsonaro or, you know, we've had our own populists here. You know, they've kind of been exposed as a fraud, and Australia has kind of, you know, we're good at public health. We can, but we're also, you know, one of the most, certainly amongst the rich countries, one of the most exposed and most vulnerable to warming. And, you know, we're already hot. We've got, you know, forecast scientists telling us that, you know, parts of the country will sooner rather than later be potentially uninhabitable due to heat. You know, we know it. We need to kind of come together and do everything we can to fix it. And yeah, there's you know, there is decades of advice, health and climate, you know, that there to guide us. And I've tried to not focus on solutions, but just to kind of focus on waking, you know, just having that conversation about how, in fact, it, you know, the human toll it's taking already through the true stories of ordinary Australians that I've spoken to, and hopefully those stories will, you know, carry the message themselves.
Well, congratulations on it, mate. Thanks for sharing your time today with us. Thank you, Fiona. We'll be sending out, we'll be sending out a link to everyone that's here with a direct one-click, one-buy. We'll also send out a link to the great work Fiona's team's doing at the Climate and Health Alliance. We'll be back on Friday with a talk about technology, where I'm joined by Lizzie O'Shea from Digital Rights Watch and Dan Stinton from Guardian Australia. But until then, thanks everybody for being with us today, and look after yourselves, stay safe and stay well, and until next time, cheers.
Thanks, Peter.